Good evening, everyone. Masa al-khair. My name is Maurice Pomerantz. It is my great privilege to welcome you this evening as the Executive Director of the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute. The Institute, as some of you may know, most of you maybe, was conceived of as a space of communication and connection between the university and the broader public, where students, faculty, and this public can come together to learn about topics of interest relevant to our lives here in Abu Dhabi and the wider world. Every year, we offer around 50 of these talks here in Abu Dhabi, and should you find yourself in New York, we offer another 30 there, and this year will prove no different. Already, in previous lectures this very semester, audiences have seen the power of new technological advances in microscopy based on the miraculous devices we call cell phone cameras that we all hold in our hands and probably have placed in our pockets. We've learned about the new advances in 6G telecommunications that will no doubt change our lives in significant ways. So please do follow us on social media, Instagram, that thing called X, Facebook, to find out more about where we are heading this semester, next semester, and beyond. But tonight, it's my distinct pleasure to take us on a different kind of journey, or at least invite us on a different kind of journey. Not into the future, but the distant past, where I hope we can turn off these phones and even more so think about this distant past of this place, the Arabian Peninsula. Our guide on this journey is a noted world expert in the deep history of Arabia. Dr. Abdullah Alsharekh holds a BA in Archaeology from King Saud University, as well as an MPhil and a PhD from the University of Cambridge. He's a specialist in prehistoric archaeology. He's authored numerous academic studies on the paleo environment, rock art, pastoralism, and archaeological methods and techniques. Alsharekh has served as well as an advisor to multiple cultural institutions in Saudi Arabia and co-led several significant research projects, including one called Paleo Deserts, the Camel Site, and the Thumama Protected Park Site. He's held the Dean and Deputy Dean positions at the College of Tourism and Archaeology at King Saud University, and he's a member of the scientific team, which we've just been hearing about, for several museums, new museums in Saudi Arabia, including the National Museum in Riyadh. So thank you very much. Welcome, ahlan wa sahlan. The floor is yours. Thank you.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أسعد الله مساكم جميعا. Thank you very much, Professor Morris, for your introduction. I am a humble member of these projects and maybe the lesser contributor to so many of their work. It's my pleasure and I'm truly delighted and privileged to be invited to this renowned institution. I thank the Senior Director of the Institute, Professor Maurice Pomerantz, and the energetic Nahid Ahmed and all supporting staff who made this talk take place. Without further ado, I start this presentation with the aim of disseminating knowledge and glimpses on the archaeology of early prehistory of Arabia. It's such a timely occasion that this talk coincides with the 94th National Day of Saudi Arabia, and I pray that peace, prosperity, and human dignity are upheld in our world for the good of humanity. Last but not least, I am so pleased to be in the Emirates, the land with marvelous people, culture, and hospitality. The goals of archaeological research in Arabia are many-fold, but the most important ones is about understanding the cultural history of Arabia and the various changes that took place along the track of time. Also track the earliest human populations in Arabia and their varying times of dispersals out of Africa and into the Arabian Peninsula. Further, understand the cultural context of Arabia's archaeological sites and disseminate knowledge about past human populations and their cultural and natural heritage. Further, correlate different archaeological sites with their respective cultural periods. But when talking about the archaeology and history of archaeology in Saudi Arabia, it's paramount important to take into consideration some of the leading figures who have molded the archaeological movement in Saudi Arabia. And these two leading figures were the driving force towards the establishment of an institutional infrastructure and an academic department, an institutional government infrastructure and an academic department. Dr. Al-Ansari on the left of the side of the screen. In spite of being a linguist in Arabic language and studied early Arabic writing, he recognized the importance of archaeology and strived, in spite of all odds, to establish a department at King Saud University, a department of archaeology at King Saud University, and sourced support for two main field excavations for the purpose of students' training. Dr. Abdullah Masri on the right-hand side of the screen, he was a prehistoric archaeologist who, with a degree from the United States, and he contributed manifold by establishing a thorough and comprehensive archaeological survey program for a country as big as a continent, and invited leading archaeologists worldwide to participate in recording and study the kingdom's past. Probably if it wasn't for him as a prehistorian, probably many prehistoric sites may not have been noticed by other people at the time. This talk is going to focus on some aspects of the Green Arabia project, which started in 2010 and is headed by Professor Michael Petraglia on the top right of the screen. I am the Saudi academic lead collaborator along with many colleagues, including my colleague Dr. Faisal Al-Jibreen, who should be here, I presume, but may have lost his way. Anyhow, he is from the Saudi Heritage Commission and also participate in the Heritage Commission is the supervising institution of the Green Arabia project. Many local and international institutions have been involved in this project. The aim of it are manifold, but mainly understand the nature of early human presence in Arabia and reconstruct its past environment. These shots, as you can see, from different sites, some of them are in the middle of the Nufud Desert, like the one down on the right. And here we have the privilege of having Prince Sultan bin Salman, the head of the Saudi Commission of Cultural Heritage and Tourism in the past, visiting one of these sites. And also we can see some of the interesting finds, an elephant tusk in the middle of the Nufud Desert as well. It is recognizable that East Africa was the birthplace of the earliest human populations nearly 2.6 million years ago. Successive waves of humans crossed towards Arabia and beyond, and probably vice versa as well, as these groups were looking for resources that keep them alive and places that are safe for them and their families. Two routes were proposed, one northern through the Sinai Peninsula, of course it's well known to everyone, and the second route is through the Bab al-Mandab in the southern end of the Red Sea. Our understanding of the paleoenvironmental history of the Arabian Peninsula relies on data gathered through remote sensing and field test trenches to collect environmental data relevant to various time periods. Arabia's modern topography exhibits major wadi systems that were thought to be running all year round and feed smaller tributaries and natural lakes, thus providing essential sources for humans, animals, and plants. Many of the constructed wadi systems here are just to the south and southwest of the Nufud Desert in northern Arabia, which is about this area over here. And we can see that many of the trenches that were excavated were in very sandy desert or paleo lake that are dry at the moment. We have reported as a team a series of dated paleo lake sequences associated with stone tool assemblages and vertebrate fossils from Khal Meshan, number 4, and Jubba basins in the Nufud Desert. These findings, including the oldest dated hominin occupations in Arabia, reveal the least five hominin expansions into the Arabian interior, coinciding with brief green windows of reduced aridity, approximately dated to 400,000, 300,000, 200,000, 130 to 75,000, and 50,000 years ago. Each incubation phase is characterized by a distinct form of material culture indicating presence of diverse hominin groups and a lack of long-term Southwest Asia population continuity. Within a general pattern of African and Eurasian hominin groups being separated by Pleistocene Saharo-Arabian aridity, our findings reveal the tempo and character of climatically modulated windows for dispersal and admixture. This publication, this paper that was published by the team, is the most important one, where it shows a long sequence of different cultural periods within the prehistory of Arabia that was not established before. The nature of human dispersals out of Africa has remained elusive because of the poor resolution of paleoecological data and direct association with remains of the earliest non-African people. Here in this paper, we reported hominin and non-hominin mammalian tracks from an ancient lake deposits in the Arabian Peninsula, that's in the Nufud Desert, north of Saudi Arabia, dated within the last interglacial. The findings, it's argued, likely represent one of the oldest securely dated evidence for Homo sapiens in Arabia. The paleoecological at the time of the publication. The paleoecological evidence indicates a well-watered semi-arid grassland setting during human movements into the Nufud Desert of Saudi Arabia. And you can see here from the various reconstruction, you can see the, we can find here elephant tracks on the dry lake, and also some human foot tracks as well that are very clearly visible here on the imagery. And again, we can see the elephant tracks on the side, and that is the bulk of the deposit at the center of the lake. And here you can see the center of the lake, the lower area is surrounded by huge sand dunes around it. Al-Wusta site in the Nufud Desert shows that the early dispersals of Homo sapiens out of Africa were not limited to the Levantian woodlands sustained by winter rainfall, but extended deep into the Arabian interior, where enhanced summer rainfall created semi-arid grasslands containing abundant fauna and perennial lakes. After long being isolated in Africa, our species expanded into the diverse ecologies of Eurasian in the late Pleistocene. With a few thousand years spreading into Eurasia, our species was occupying growing forest environments and making long sea crossings to remote islands. We can see here the earliest human fossil that was found, which is part of a finger of Homo sapiens that was is regarded to be the earliest human remains in Arabia so far. And of course, there was associated lithic material with this find, which we were lucky to find within the site perimeters. Illustrated here is a map of Camp 4, which is Khal Meshan 4 in the Nufud Desert, showing the position of the different lakes on the left side of the screen. And lake boundaries, trenches, and fossils, and full sedimentary sequence, that's on the left side, and full sedimentary sequence. Of the fossil-bearing deposits. Animal bones include extinct megafauna such as elephants, hippopotamus, and buffalo. Other animals include ostriches, oryx, horse, turtle, gazelle, among many others. This slide shows the first detailed taphonomic study of the large Unit 5 fossil assemblage from the site of Ta's al-Ghada in the western Nufud Desert. We aim to assess which actors were responsible for the accumulation of the assemblages and evaluate evidence that might be consistent with the accumulation of fauna by hominins. The taphonomic work shows that the Unit 5 faunal assemblages was accumulated by ambush predators, likely large felids and hominins, in a lakeside environment, and that carcasses were subsequently scavenged by more carnivores such as hyena and canids. These bone samples do bear some chewing marks by animals. In conclusion, Arabia has a rich history of human presence. We are only documenting the tip of the sand dune. The more advanced are our methodologies and techniques, the more we are able to tell the full story in shorter time. Field research results should have their regular appearance at museum exhibitions, public talks, and field visits, and I believe the Institute have done its job in this regard. Aridity and low rainfall never were obstacles for human populations, past or present. But they did limit their abilities and led them to make innovative solutions. I thank you all for your attendance, and it is imperative to recognize that I am only a member of the bigger team from many institutions who made all the hard work. I thank again my host and appreciate all their efforts in making this talk take place. Thank you very much.
I see one right there. If you could be so kind as to use a microphone and identify yourself. I'm sure there are lots of questions about megafauna.
I hope
like
not.
Hello.
And you, yes.
Hello, sir. Thank you so much for your talk. I'm Renita from Hong Kong, and I would like to ask, what are some difficulties you and your team face when doing archaeology work in a country? Thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't grasp it.
Yeah. What are the difficulties you and your teams face when doing your studies here?
Oh, what other difficulties?
Yeah.
Yes. We don't have too many hands. to do the work, to be honest. That's really, we need more work, more teams to participate, more students' participation, more volunteers. All of these things contribute to really better results as well. Thank you for your question.
Any other questions? Please go right ahead. If you could either speak up or use a microphone. It might help to use a microphone if you can.
Where is the mic?
There's a microphone right there. Thank you.
Dr. Abdullah, good evening. Good evening to all, and good evening to you, Dr. Maurice. Thank you for organizing this. With regards to the two theories concerning the first migration of people from Africa to or through Arabia, according to the findings of the team, which theory do you think the discoveries support more or more inclined to support? Would you like me to ask it in Arabic, or this is fine?
Okay.
Thanks.
But I didn't get the question.
There are two theories concerning the migration of people from Africa through or to Arabia. Yes or no?
There are two theories about the migration out of Africa.
Yes.
I don't know, what are they?
The first theory is that the first people migrated through Arabia or to Arabia from southern Arabia. They came to Arabia. And
Oh, okay, so the northern route and the southern route.
Yes.
I
yes.
get you, thank you.
So
Okay.
the discoveries which the team made support which theory?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's actually, I am a little bit sensitive about the word of migration, because I think migration has certain connotations, and especially in modern times and so on. It's more of a sort of movement, dispersal. The people are not really, they are looking for resources, natural resources and so on. So they are exploring the landscape and being affected by the sort of varied seasons, climatic seasons within the region and so on. In relation to the routes out of Africa, there can be, it can be both. The southern route, one needs more sort of evidence to support that, to find more evidence. But there are strong sort of arguments in that regard, and it's not an issue. It's not an issue if it's northern or southern or anything like that. It's not an issue. The second thing, it's not only just out of Africa, but also could be vice versa, going back also into Africa. So it's Africa is not just sort of people are moving out of it, but it can be the other way around, because people were just moving, probably remembering or knowing about some places that their grandparents or their parents visited before with the resources and so on. So they just look for these things. So, but this is one of the things that is very difficult to really find, material culture that tells you people from Arabia went back to Africa and so on. Thank you.
Other questions? I was struck by the existence of these megafauna in Arabia that, of course, we wouldn't have. I mean, it doesn't immediately come to mind. And I wondered a little bit. I know one of the going theories about megafauna and some of their extinctions are actually that humans are, we don't often think of ourselves this way, but we're big predators, right?
Yes.
And I'm wondering a little bit about that. Do you imagine that the existence of megafauna and humans are you finding them, near one another? And does that suggest anything about sort of how were people actually living? How were they getting enough protein sort of to live in Arabia? Or was the climate, in these moments when the climate changed, was it actually sort of livable? So tell us a little bit about what the theories are about, how are people actually surviving through these periods? And is there, I guess that would be the first question that was coming to my mind.
Sure. I mean, it's a well-known fact that many parts of the world have or did experience various amounts of rainfall through time. Mm-hmm. And there were certain sort of periods that rainfall was very heavy and abundant, and that established big wadi systems or rivers that run throughout the year. Mm-hmm. And also huge lakes that we have seen in the middle of the Nufud Desert, and it wasn't one or two. There are hundreds. If you just look up through Google Earth or any satellite imagery into these deserts, and including the Rub al-Khali desert as well, you will find all these white patches, which is all indicative of water being deposited there and stayed there until it dried out with varying conditions. The presence of these megafaunas also supports and complements actually the environmental data and the actual data in the field because these megafaunas can't live in sort of conditions that lack enough water around or enough food and grass and so on. And we also have to realize that Arabia is actually part of a wider environmental system with North Africa. So all of that is really connected one way or another.
Is that something that you're doing with the work that you're doing in Saudi Arabia, trying to connect to broader pictures of prehistory? So maybe you can actually tell us a little bit about that, because I think for a lot of us, when I go back, my historical window maybe is a little bit longer than a lot of folks. I study the 10th century. Everyone thinks, oh, you study the past. But when I hear 50,000, 150,000 years ago, and I wonder about sort of the ways in which human life ways are changing, what kind of evidence we can get about this from the sort of finds that you've been looking at. I know that you've also worked closer, at least I was looking at some of your publications, closer to things that carvings on stone that you find in Arabia, even a beautiful, I remarked a very beautiful image of a camel that I saw as well amongst publications of yours. And I'm wondering, as we move sort of from this very distant time where the environment of Arabia is radically different from what we imagine, as we move closer to let's say, our own time, if we think of Roman antiquity, can you kind of tell us a little bit about the kinds of changes that, you as an archaeologist, you sort of think about? What are the sorts of things that you...
Sure. I can't tell you about the later period.
Yes.
But I can tell you about prehistoric period in more detail. You see, Arabia in general has a lot of potential for early human populations. The challenge is really where to look and who's doing the effort to really look for these sites and these locations. The historical notion that we had, for example, about Eastern Arabia, that includes the Gulf countries, Eastern Saudi Arabia, and so on, is that, we will not find anything beyond the Neolithic period. 6,000, 7,000, 8,000. That's it, Somehow, maybe everything was under the Arabian Gulf, in the Arabian Gulf bed or something like this. But now we find that in the Emirates, we find sites that go up to 200,000 years old.
Yeah.
Which is really impressive. So that doesn't hold it from also going beyond that into 300,000, 400,000, a million years. But it's just, there are so many sediments all around the place that one cannot really have enough hands. Coming back to the first question, we don't have enough hands to really look into this. But it's just the technologies and so on. But also there are also challenges in regard to historical research that took place in Arabia as well. For example, we have the site of Shuwaitiyah in northern Saudi Arabia, and that site was on comparative grounds, was compared to Olduvai Gorge, which is the most important site in the world and the most well-documented site and so on. And the Shuwaitiyah site was dated to about 1 million or 1.3 million years old. But you know, the methodologies, the techniques and so on were sort of limited at the time. So now that make us reconsider these things. But also we are encouraged by the discovery of sites, for example, as far as Europe, in Georgia, for example, 1.8, 1.9 million years old. So all of these populations coming out of Africa must have sort of wandered around in Arabia and so on. Probably the aridity, the long aridity epochs, especially the later ones, have made sort of probably exposed the archaeological layers of some site, or at the same time they may have buried these sites under maybe tens of meters of sand dunes and so on.
So there's kind of advantages sometimes about doing archaeology in Arabia as opposed to sometimes being disadvantages, right?
Absolutely. And also in regard to the techniques, in the past we are sort of holding our hands, finding organic material to use radiocarbon dating for it. Nowadays, from specks of sands, we can date archaeological layers without using organic material for that purpose. So the development of techniques and...
Can you explain that? I still sort of remember radiocarbon dating.
Yes.
What's happened?
Yes, I mean, the ability to date sand exposure, last sand exposure to the sun using a technique called OSL dating, which is too technical for me to dig into, but physicists might know about it. And that gives you a longer age range, whereby you know this particular layer where you collected this sample of sand specks tells you the time that passed since it was last exposed to the sun. So that gives you an accurate date of the layer. So whatever with the layer, whether it's lithic material, whether it's organic material and so on, it goes beyond the carbon-14 range, which is 50 to 60,000 max. So these techniques help us really.
So when you find these stone tools without any organic remains, you now know how to date them.
Sometimes you might find organic remains that don't have the particular material that you can date with.
Does this technique mean that Arabia is somehow a zone for real exploration of a kind that elsewhere you couldn't do? Because you're telling me that this is based in sand.
Well, everywhere you can find sand.
You can find sand, right? Oh, you've got it in abundance in the Arabian Peninsula.
Anywhere, yes.
Okay, absolutely. So this is actually a technique that's helping people in this sort of deep time.
Of course.
Wow, really interesting. I'm sure there are other questions out there. I see one. Yes?
Thanks very much for the interesting talk. I'm a scientist from South Africa, and we're looking at ways where academic studies can have more impact on the world. I'm wondering if you could comment on the relationship between your kind of studies and tourism, because that's something we'd really like to try and develop more. Seems to be something that you do.
Yes, absolutely. Tourism is pushing us hard nowadays to really excavate sites quickly and bring results, and be able to really transform a site to be sort of a visitor's haven. That takes a lot of time for archaeologists. It's challenging, but I think modern media outlets, the social media and so on, sometimes conveys the message and inform the interested people or the public to really learn more about these sites and so on. through social media. Sometimes visiting some sites is very difficult and challenging because by their nature they are very sensitive and they are just a few sort of centimeters of layers. And for the general public, it may not mean anything to them. It's like going into the desert. They can't see anything. Most of the material that have been collected are sort of studied in some, are being studied in a lab or maybe taken to a museum. So really depending on the cultural period, that one can really find going to the site for tourist purposes is necessary or unnecessary, is worth weighing by the sort of organization or by the government that is handling that.
Okay, I see another question.
Thank you, sir, for the interesting talk. Could these remains we have just seen be related to Iram people or city of Iram, or are they more recent? If not, what information do we have about Iram remains? Thank you very much.
Okay, well, this is one of the most common questions about Iram and so on. Iram is mentioned in historical sources and Quranic sources and so on. No evidence has been found. No sort of geographical no geographical informations we can rely on to really know where it is. So that's all I can say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question. Could you go up to the microphone? Thank you.
I'm wondering, what would you say would be the earliest date of like human settlement, like established settlements in Arabia?
Okay, thank you. Well, if you say established settlement, you mean like they have houses, like they have towns and so on? Or you mean established settlement, you mean just an archaeological site? Sorry? Ah, okay, okay. Yeah, I think probably the site, there is a site in the Tabuk region, which is northwest Saudi Arabia. It's called, it has basic buildings, and on top of it, there are stone structures. The site is called, just skipped my mind, to be honest. It's about 9,000 or 10,000 years old.
You know, it's funny. I'm looking at my friend Tim and Natalie, and my Yemen friends, the friends I met first a long time ago in the Arabian Peninsula.
Sure.
And I'm wondering about the climates of. I mean, you know, there, of course, to this day, right? We have in Yemen these climates which are very hospitable for human settlement. What can you tell us about sort of the prehistory of that?
Yes, of course. Yemen has a rich cultural history from the earliest times.
Sure.
And there were so many foreign expeditions that were excavating there. But lately, in the past maybe a few decades, they don't have much people or many people working in there. Mm-hmm. But the potential is very high. The early history of Yemen is well documented. And it's just part of the whole scene in the Arabian Peninsula. As you mentioned, the favorable environmental conditions in Yemen, also in Oman as well, in the Jabal al-Akhdar. All of these things are favorable conditions, but you know, there is a need for thorough research by experts to really look for the sort of archaeological sites that reflects the
so if we
detailed cultural scenario for time.
Because if we go deep back into time, we kind of wonder if these similar monsoon sort of
of
patterns
course, of
were
course.
still operating. Maybe they were operating differently. They must have been, right? So
Absolutely.
that seems like a really, in some ways, a really interesting kind of
Absolutely.
phenomenon, right?
Absolutely.
So at a certain point, things must have changed. Certainly from the more recent history of Arabia that I know,
Of course. Of course.
Very,
But
very,
still, you
very
know, the
important.
highlands, with the highlands and so on, the arid conditions and so on may not be as a factor that affected human presence there, unlike the sort of lowlands and the plateaus and so on in Central and North Arabia.
I kind of, when I'm thinking about the Nafud Desert filled with lakes,
Imagine.
I wonder a little bit about that. I don't know. I'm imagining in my mind's eye something like Minnesota or something. But I'm not exactly sure that's right. But tell us a little bit more about that, about like what, if so you've looked at these water systems, you've kind of mapped them out.
Yes.
This is all from rainwater, presumably?
Yes.
That's a theory?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
No rivers in Arabia?
Sorry?
No rivers in Arabia.
Well, they were probably rivers at the time.
Okay.
Of course. Yes,
Wow.
and that's why if you look at the larger rivers like Sarhan, Wadi Sarhan, and so many wadis around in different parts of Arabia, you can find that their banks or their width is over a kilometer sometimes.
So that would
So
be...
that must have been, there must have been a lot of water gushing through them
Right.
for longer periods to really cut into the
Right.
the deposits and the sand and the rocks and so on and so on. For example, Wadi Rimma that crosses, and Wadi Sarhan
Okay.
and Wadi Fatma on the western side of Arabia, and also you got also in the south Wadi Hadramaut and so on. All of these major river systems that must have been running all year long.
Wow.
But with the sort of dried or arid periods, of course, they must have scaled down.
Wow, so, I guess we weren't wrong when we think about camels as ships of the desert. Maybe there were ships,
Exactly.
there were actually ships
Exactly.
of Arabia before.
Absolutely.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, I see another question there. You can head to the microphone.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
Sorry, I missed the lecture. I came at the end. I'm not sure if you tackled this issue, but through your experience and reading the history of the past of the Arabia, what is your prediction for the future? Are there any cycle of prediction future? Thank you.
Not something an archaeologist often answers.
All is going to be good. Don't worry. I'm a prehistorian. I am limited a little bit.
Yes. So I'm curious how you ended up working in this field. What drew you to the deep past? What was it? Was it a trip to a museum? Was it?
Well, okay. I'll since you mention it.
You don't.
Actually, how did I get into archaeology by itself? I was a high school student in my last year, and I'm going to the university. I don't know what to choose, what subject to choose. So one of my colleagues was one of my friends in the high school was the son of our renowned professor, Dr. Al-Ansari,
Okay.
whom we didn't know about him at the time, in 1980, in the 80s. So he said, why not come to my father and speak to him? And he is the dean of the College of Arts, so he will tell you about the various subjects and so on. So I said, okay. I went to see him and sat in his home office, and he talked to me about all subjects and specialties within the College of Arts. And then lastly, he talked to me about archaeology. So I thought, okay, all of these subjects have been already saturated with, students who graduated from the university, took all the job opportunities available then. Archaeology, we might have a chance to to find something. We might, there might not be so many graduates out of archaeology. And also at the same time, I like, I don't like being restrained in an office environment a lot. I always would like to go outdoors and so on and see the desert. I enjoy it, especially during sort of rain time and so on. So I thought I'll give it a go and just get into archaeology. And then I got into archaeology, graduated from my bachelor, and became took a job at the university as an academic. And then I was supposed to be sent for scholarship abroad and to study a subject. So among all the subjects, I find nobody was specializing in prehistory. So I thought also, again, I don't want to be a repetition of somebody else's or some colleagues who have already studied these subjects and become just, one of the back. I wanted to be to cover some area that nobody is actually working on. So I went into prehistory. That's it, briefly.
Okay, thank you. Go right ahead. Yep.
Like in Arabia, when people disperse from Africa, did they like stay in the same places or they moved around Arabia because like they're different? I heard there are different people of different sizes, so maybe they changed in their own spaces or they also mixed around.
Yes, the nature of humans in prehistoric times, it's always people are moving. They don't have a stationary location or a stationary setup that they become associated with for a long time, because it's all about resources. People were always consuming rather than producing, and that's what makes them need to always look for resources to consume more. Until the later prehistory in the Neolithic period, about 8,000-9,000 years ago, that slowly people have changed their economic setup into more of a production society.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I wanted to know if you have a favorite archaeological site in Arabia. And why?
And why? Yeah, I don't have favorite. That all sites are relevant somehow and important in their own way.
So now that you're working also in this museum space, I know the Neolithic is part of this big story of Arabia, and I'm sure you're actually when you are dealing with a sort of a natural kind of history museum, but then also dealing with this sort of the story of human settlement. Telling the story is a really challenging thing, right? Because on the one hand, you want to tell a coherent story. At the same time, as a scientist, that story is always changing. And I wondered if you could reflect a little bit on what that's like. And partially, I think, at least for me, I'm speaking kind of with ignorance, there are parts of the story that I only partially know myself. Like, I think probably a big story for Arabia after the period you're an expert in is when people elsewhere, when they started to ride horses, but in the case of Arabia, camels, the sort of drinking of camel milk was really important in Arabia. I mean, how do you go about, if you're sort of charged with working in a museum, telling this big kind of narrative, but knowing kind of that narrative is actually one that you're just now, actually, in certain things that you tell me are kind of, you're working it out, right? You're kind of working with that narrative. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what's that like, to sort of deal with that problem?
Yes, I think in a museum setting, you always need the experts on telling the story.
Mm-hmm.
We are the ones who sort of convey it, but probably we are not the best ones to tell the story in the museum setting, the writing up, the the media, and so on. All of these things are sort of needs people who are more into public relations, into the media, and so on. So they are the ones who can really formulate the story, you know, in a sort of more precise way, in collaboration with the archaeologist. Because the archaeologist will give the technical and factual information, and they will be the ones who are, you know, who are sort of an expert on writing it up and presenting it and showing it in the various forms and ways that suits the recipients, you know, the general public. And also the other thing is that also from the side of the recipient or the museum visitors and so on, their interest and questions and looking for answers, looking for resources and so on, that even enrich the experience within a museum setting, because sometimes not all museum goers are very enthusiastic about going into the details.
Yes.
They just want to see the buildings, see nice objects, glitter and so on. So this is really the way I see, you know, the more interest one has, the more questions they will put forward, and the more answers they will get into the deeper issues.
Right. I mean, with you, with your sort of knowledge of this deep history, the things you tell us are rather shocking, right? On some level, when I hear this about all this water in Arabia, I'm wow, okay. And I'm led to other kinds of questions about the nature of climate and change.
Sure.
And I would imagine that for a lot of us, we have questions like that. You know, we immediately hear this and we're like, wow, okay, the world has actually radically changed. And how then do you tell that story as well? Because that's also part of this story.
Yes.
You know, and it's an interesting one, I think. You know, to
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, climate is the most sort of the biggest factor that affected human populations through time and geographically as well. And from that, we can recognize that human populations have been able to overcome all the difficulties of climatic conditions and adaptation.
Right.
And if we go a little bit, you know, like something like 100 years or 150 years or 300 years or, you know, the past few hundred years, we can see from the stories that we hear from our parents and grandparents and so on about the hard life that they had.
Right.
The difficulties, they don't leave anything that they don't try to find food or any proteins or anything out of it. And some of them, of course, moved to other regions or other parts of the region in the north or the south and so on. But many have, you know, remained steadfast within their, you know, areas, in spite of sort of in some extreme conditions, people were just dying.
Yeah.
And they can't just cope with burying enough or finding graves for enough for many of them. So that tells you that, you know, the challenges are always confronted by humans by innovating means to really overcome these difficulties and challenges, even if that means relocating to another place or trying to find more resources and so on.
I see a question there. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much. I have actually two questions. So you touched upon the animal remains that you find in your discoveries, but what about the plantations and trees? So have you found anything on that matter? And can we trace, for example, some of the unique plants in the Arabia today back to the prehistoric times? For example, the palm trees or other trees as well. And my second question is about what you said about the need for more people to do these archaeological studies. So is it a matter of not enough resources, or is just you know, you don't find enough people interested in archaeology? Because in the UAE here, I think there is a challenge to find people who are interested in archaeology, and there hasn't been enough encouragement, I think, to delve into this field. So, I would.
Yeah, and in regard to the first question about plant remains and palynological studies, looking, for example, for pollens that come from plants and so on. Yes, it's quite challenging to find these in some archaeological sites. And one needs to do more into investigating more areas, bringing more specialists to look into these things. We can find, and even, for example, with rock art that goes up to 8,000-9,000 years old. Also, plants are not the sort of not so common as much as humans or other animals to be represented in rock art as well. Very few types and so on, and likewise even birds, except for the ostriches, are also not much is represented. So yes, I agree with you. The second question, yes. It depends on the so many aspects relating to the people envisage themselves being or working in certain ways or certain processes and so on, or working in the field. The return out of working in such subjects or with such subjects may also have an impact on the person's interest themselves or disinterest in this sort of work. I think the best way to go about it is really to have an institutional sort of work that really gives the opportunity for people to work as teams, and probably that will produce better results.
One more question.
Oh, great. Hi.
Yeah. I was curious, are you doing any work with Najla Salman Al-Sair? And if so, what are you collaborating on with her?
Najla Al-Sair?
Yes, Al-Sair. She's one of the top archaeologists, female archaeologists in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh. Are you familiar with her?
Yes, she's one of my students.
Oh, are you collaborating in any work with her?
Yes.
What are you working on with her? Or?
No, I'm not working with her on any project, but she's working in one of the government departments. She's a good archaeologist.
Thank you.
Can you help us understand in Saudi Arabia? I mean, there's a long historical period, and I know you're an expert in this one, this very important period. Tell us a little bit more, because it's very much tied up with tourism as well. Like, we have these new tourist sites, and well, they're not new. Sure. They're very old. Sure. They're new as tourist sites, perhaps. Tell us a little bit about that kind of combination between tourism and kind of archaeological work. What periods you think are being sort of emphasized? What areas are there for growth and new exploration of places? I know certainly here in some ways archaeology are sometimes chance finds, right? So you find like shocking things about the late antique things that go on. So what I mean, 5th, 6th centuries of the Common Era here in Eastern Arabia. We didn't know anything about that, and sure enough, things come to light. Tell us a little bit about that. What is?
Yes, of course. Saudi Arabia have inscribed 8 archaeological sites of different periods onto the World Heritage Sites list.
Oh, okay.
So these 8 sites are naturally going to be well prepared for being, major tourist sites. These include Dir'iyah, which is the sort of the founding city of the Saudi state. There is Al-Faw, a pre-Islamic city that has just been recently inscribed. There is the rock art sites of Jubba and Shuwaymas in the central Saudi Arabia, and there is historical Jeddah downtown as well, and there is Al-Ula, as well. So all of these, and there is the Hima, which is also quite interesting rock art site, and also historical wells.
Wow.
That people who wants to cross the Rub al Khali, the empty quarter, they have to, get water from these wells and just transport them with their camels and so on to be able to cross the desert. So all of these sites as being inscribed into the UNESCO World Heritage Sites are prepared to be being prepared to be expecting so many tourists. And that's part of the government's initiative to really increase tourism in Saudi Arabia in a large part, along with other sort of tourism destinations and on the Red Sea and so on that are not particularly cultural.
But how old are the rock art sites? Are they?
Yeah, about 8,000 to 9,000.
Wow,
Yes.
that's quite.
Yeah, that's the earliest. But also there is also even during the Islamic period, it's different cultural periods as well.
Yes, of course. I mean, as an Arabist, all of those inscriptions in Arabia of the Thamudic, those are Safavidic, those are all really still an area of great growth in the studies. So seems like there's a lot of potential all throughout graduate school. I think I was telling you, everyone was talking about archaeology in Saudi Arabia, and it seems now that this is really happening, which is actually quite exciting for scholars.
Absolutely.
So there are I don't see any. Oh, I see. Okay, we'll take one or two. I see a scholar's question and another scholar. Go right ahead, and we'll take these, and then.
So my question is not really related to this with the scholars, but when we had the question regarding plants, I was wondering if you have looked into pollen analysis, for instance, where there once were lakes. Is it possible to even do pollen analysis today, or is all the biological material gone?
Yes, it's possible, of course, and pollen must be present in so many of these sediments and archaeological sites. Probably we need some more people to look into that more closely. Yes.
Hi.
William Zimmerly, NYU AD faculty of the Ancient World. First, I just want to thank you. In 2014, I took my first trip to Saudi Arabia, and it was sponsored by the SCTA. And I came to look at the Al collection, the incense burners. And I think you were dean at the time of the university. And you and your faculty welcomed me with open arms. And we sat on the couch and had a couple hours discussion of archaeology of Saudi Arabia. And since then, with Saudi Arabia opening for archaeological work, I've done a lot of consulting and projects. And so my question really centers around this, and I think about this a lot as an archaeologist. The archaeology of Saudi Arabia, for many of us who are in the room who are archaeologists, we learned about it, but there was a sort of gap as Westerners. We couldn't always access the research, although it was being published in ATLIL and other sources. And so it was a sort of gap, but an artificial gap. Now that we have exponentially increased the amount of research, I think about this a lot. We are breaking the historical paradigms for the other archaeologies that are around Saudi Arabia. For example, Levantine archaeology, we now know Bronze Age walls existed earlier than the Levant, right, in Saudi Arabia in the north. We know the impact of the Sea Peoples extended further beyond the southern Levant into northern Arabia. We realize, for example, and I saw this on my first trip, the material culture from North Arabia looked a lot like, the Levant and South Jordan, and the material culture in the south of Saudi Arabia looked a lot like Yemen and Dhofar, right? And for example, we had discussions about this. As we think about those paradigms now that we were taught in graduate school, they're breaking down before our eyes. And so this last question is sort of a question about the future like we had before, but this one maybe as an archaeologist, you can answer. What do you think will happen in 10 years when we go to rewrite the textbooks, not just of the Neolithic period, but other periods, or in 20 years, as the data is increasing so rapidly before our eyes? You know, in a way, it's prophetic. What changes do you see? What will then, as the gap is being filled out from the archaeology of Saudi Arabia, how will we reconceive of the field, our own discipline, and also our own historical paradigms in 10 or 20 or 30 years?
Great question.
That's very deep. Thank you. I think it will increase exponentially. You know, the more time passes, the more discoveries will happen, unless, you know, something slows them down. But the increase in knowledge will come as much as there are fieldwork teams working on the various sort of archaeologies, different periods, and so on. So this is the nature of things. 50 years ago, our knowledge have transformed maybe by 30% or 40%. 70 years ago, transformed by a larger percentage, and our ideas and thoughts and theories and all probably transformed almost 80% and so on. So there is a lot of change within the discipline itself, and how the thoughts are taking place. And for example, the notions that were prevalent in the last century or the early part of the last century are completely sort of rejected by so many archaeologists and so on, as being sort of one-sided view of culture, one-sided view of societies, one-sided view of the other. So all of these things get re-looked at again and again through time. But, you know, always, you know, as long as one is really using the scientific techniques in a more objective means, and also developing these techniques, I'm sure it will improve our knowledge. Archaeology is always, and archaeological research as well as so many other disciplines as well, it's always developing the discipline, developing the knowledge that we harvest through our research and study. So it's the nature of things, yes.
Well, it's very nice to know that the past has a future. Right now, although I think if there are no further questions, I think we should live in, oh, there's one, okay, one last one. I was about to say we're supposed to live in the present. That's what all the psychologists tell us, live in the present right now. So we'll live in the present, and go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the conference. And well, I have just two questions. One, if you found already like a human remain, but not Homo sapien in your peninsula, like Neanderthal or Australopithecus, something like this. And the second question, you mentioned that you need more hands for finding in the different sites. How you, like, are you open to volunteers, or how it works? Thank you.
Yes. Yes, for the first question, the only thing that we found is just a small piece of bone that is about 85 to 90,000 years old for Homo sapiens. We haven't found anything else, even for, you know, Homo sapiens or anything else. We haven't found anything older than maybe 5,000 or 6,000 years old from the later periods. That's in this regard. The second point is really usually archaeological research in Saudi Arabia is undertaken by local institutions or international teams. So usually international teams, they are the ones who formulate their team members, and they can bring their volunteers with them. They can bring various expertise with them. It all in the hands of the team leaders to really bring people on and so on. So this is how it goes.
But how we can contact these international teams?
Yes, I mean, just if you look into, for example, into the literature, the publications, the various publications and the authors who are doing these things, and also what is the added value that one brings to the team. Probably somebody is specialist in pollen. That would be interesting. Somebody is specialist, for example, in data. Somebody is specialist in, various other disciplines. They can also be an important addition to the team. Absolutely.
Understood. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Well, that's a hopeful note to end on. Thank you all for coming, and thank you. Please join me in thanking Dr. Saud. Thank you so much.
Thank you.